his background and experience.
So thank you, Paul, for the presentation. I'm going to give you some comments. So Paul, Susan, and Paul Nerney are coming to this workshop from the perspective of experts in different aspects of preparing a research paper and getting it published. My role here is as somebody like you, who's in an academic career, who's in the publish or perish track, and who is constantly under pressure to publish research in good journals. And so I want to give you a few perspectives because a few thoughts from my perspective as somebody who is like you, who's trying to write papers and get them published. Let me start with one of the points that you made, Paul, and that is about making it easy. Okay, and I say this for two reasons. When you submit a paper to a journal, you want to do everything that you can to make it easy for the editor to understand what your paper is about, and to make it easy for the editor to say, this is not one I'm going to throw away, this is one I'm going to send to the reviewers. Okay? And a number of the things over here are very mechanistic things. They have little to do with the idea. It's more about just preparing a manuscript that makes it easy for the editor to focus on what you are trying to say, rather than whether you formatted it correctly and whether you know, those kinds of mechanical things. Okay? So number one, make it easy for the editor to take your paper and say, I'm going to give it to a reviewer because I think this can be published later. The other thing you want to do, and perhaps you didn't cover this because you're in the position of somebody who edits and publishes rather than a reviewer. I review dozens of papers for journals. I also review grant proposals. In fact, I'm reviewing some right now. And you also want to make it easy for the reviewer to understand what you are trying to say. Okay? And much of what you do for the editor carries over to the reviewer. Okay? So let me spend a little bit of time on the relationship between the author and the reviewer, because that wasn't covered in this presentation. And that's something that we engage with when we are trying to get our papers published. When I receive a paper from a journal to review, the first thing I do is, usually the invitation comes online. The first thing I do is I look at the abstract of the paper and say, is this something that I know something about? Do I know enough to be able to review this paper? And two, because I'm extremely busy, do I have the time to review? Do I really want to read this paper? Or do I want to say, sorry, I don't have time, please find somebody else? Okay? So one of the things you need to do is you need to make your paper interesting enough so that a scholar who has some interest in your field is going to say, okay, that's an interesting title, that's an interesting abstract, I'm going to review it. Right? If the editor of the journal has difficulty finding people who will review your paper, the likelihood that your paper gets rejected is going to be high. Okay? I'm sure you can agree with this. Right?
Absolutely.
Because what that tells the editor is, nobody is interested in this paper. Why should I publish it in my journal? Okay?
Equally true of books.
Equally true of books. Yeah. We are focusing on journal articles, but this applies to book manuscripts.
No, we have rejected things at the press on grounds that it was so hard to find a reviewer that we decided, well, if nobody's interested, why would we want to publish the book? That simple.
Okay? So make sure that you convey, you get the reviewer, somebody like yourself. Make sure you write your paper in such a way that they say, wow, I want to read this. I want to find out what this person is saying. Okay? Another thing that I look for when I'm reviewing papers, I look for three things. So usually what good journals do is they have double-blind review. Do you know what double-blind peer review is? Double-blind review means the journal is not going to tell the reviewers who you are, the name of the author. That's removed. And the journal will not tell you who reviewed your paper. Okay? Generally, the highest quality journals have double-blind review. So you get a paper, you don't know who wrote it. And so what are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on who the person is? No. You're going to focus on their ideas. Right? This is about seeing whether the ideas are good ones. Okay? Now, when the review is double-blind, you don't know who the person is. Okay? So what are the three things I look for when I'm a reviewer? Number one, I look for significance. Okay? when you are writing your paper, are you finding something that advances the state of knowledge? Is this intellectually significant work? Are you saying something that perhaps we didn't know earlier? And knowing would be important. Okay, so for example, even though the reason why you are wearing that shirt may be interesting to you, it's probably not interesting to a wide audience. However, the reason that identities are shifting, let's say in Java, right? And the way in which you're studying them using different names and naming systems, that is something that might be much more interesting to a lot of people, and maybe people don't know about, okay? So significance is number one. How are you advancing the state of the knowledge in the field? Number two is innovation, okay? And what I mean by innovation is, are you doing something new? Not just finding new insights, but are your methods new? Are they different? Are you looking at a question from an angle that nobody has ever looked at before? All right? That's innovation. And the third thing I look for is your approach. Okay? How are you doing this? Are you doing it in a way that is sound, that makes sense, that is logical? A lot of the research I do is quantitative. I look at the quantitative methods, I make sure that the assumptions are reasonable, and I make sure that if you gave me your data and I followed the methods that you use, I will get the same results. Okay? So these are some of the things that a reviewer of a journal article is looking for: significance, innovation, and approach. And if your paper does well on all three of these, and you communicate your ideas effectively, and don't trouble the editor or the reviewer too much with the way it's organized or typed, I think you have a very good chance of getting your paper published. I know I have a little more time, but actually it's 10:30, so
well,
I think
let me just add one point about the data, because I said you don't want to stuff all that into the article. But what's starting to happen is that repositories are collecting the data. So if you write an article and you have a big data set that is used for that article, there are often now possibilities you can put that data somewhere so that other people can refer to it. And this is becoming particularly important just in the past few years, so that your data set may be available so that somebody can actually go to that and check your results based on that data. And journals increasingly are asking for that. Okay, we'll publish the article, you send your data set, and we'll put it somewhere that people can access it.
So this is one of the aspects of good research, is what we call replicability, right? So there are two ways in which replicability can happen. The most immediate way is, if you give me the data that you used, and I read your paper, all the methods that you used, I should be able to take the data, do exactly what you did, and come up with the same conclusions. Okay? And when your data are made available on the internet, sometimes people are going to try to do that. And if they find that there's a problem, then there's a big problem. Okay? The other form of replicability I won't go into. That's when people use other data sets to ask the same question, and they find the same results. And that's usually a sign of very good scholarship. So do we have time for questions now, or?
Sure. That's fine. I think, well, I can't remember what the time is. I think we're about time for the break, right?
I think so. 10.
But if anyone has...
Does anybody have questions?
Or comment?
So you're all writing papers and you want to get them published. What are the questions that you have?
Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
There are no stupid questions.
So I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
In an article like this, in a journal article, is there room for appendices? Like if you want to put data, like hard data, instead of putting it in a repository, you want to put it there for the reader to be able to refer to it right away. Would that be acceptable?
Almost always, because of the kind of research I do, I have an appendix.
Yeah, because you don't want to put it in the text,
That's right.
but you want to put it as part of it so that the reader can immediately refer
But
to it.
selectively, presumably.
Right. You don't dump everything.
Yeah.
But so I'll give you an example. Some of the research I do on Indonesia is quantitative, right? So this is a problem that some of you might also face. So some of the research I do is quantitative research, but it's on the history of Indonesia. Okay? And so you can write this article for two different types of people. I can write the article for somebody who's interested in history, or I can write the article for somebody who's interested in how to analyze data. Okay? These are two very different groups of people, and I've published in both types of journals. But you have to write your paper very differently if you're writing for somebody who's interested in techniques compared to if you're writing for somebody who's interested in the history. Okay? My interest is in publishing for people who are interested in history. Those are the people who are interested in the topic with whom I want to have a conversation. So all the technical stuff, what do? I say, look, I'm interested in history and you are interested in history. If you're also interested in technique, I'm going to put it in an appendix, take a look at it. But most historians probably don't want to spend too much time on it, and some of them probably weren't trained to look at it, so I don't want to waste their time. I don't want them to switch off while they're reading the paper.
But again, this is what I said about trust, because the historians, you're basing this on data.
Yes.
And as a historian, I trust you to have done a good job of interpreting the data.
Now, a good journal will send an article like that when it sends it out to review. It will send it to historians. It will send it to quantitative people as well, to make sure that the article is strong on all dimensions. In fact, a paper that I had published, Paul, in the Journal of Asian Studies on Indonesia, it was actually one of the best review experiences that I have. Why? Because it was reviewed by, I think, 5 different people. And some of them, and those people, all of them, when I looked at the reviews, all of them knew the subject really well. In some cases, they knew parts of the subject better than I did. And they gave me comments that helped to improve the paper. So to come back to, Paul, to your other point about the nature of the review process. Even though it seems like they're saying mean things to you and nasty things about your paper, at the end of the day, this is about improving your research. And almost always, whether or not my papers get accepted or rejected, my most recent paper just got rejected. Desk reject. So it did not even go out for review. The editor looked and said, no. Okay, we don't want to send this. Okay? So this happens. But in almost all cases, if it goes out for review, what you learn from the reviewers can only help your article. Whether or not your paper gets published in that journal or rejected, it doesn't matter. It improves the quality of your work. So look closely at what the reviewers are saying. See if you can improve your paper based on their comments. And if you can, you want to work all their comments into your paper. You want to make sure that you
I come from Brawijaya, so I have a question which is
Surabaya.
Mada.
Oh, Mada, okay.
Yeah. So you mentioned before about the Scopus Index journal, and so do you think that Scopus journals are more valuable than the non-Scopus journals? Because my field is in linguistics, yeah, and then many good journals in my field are not Scopus Index, and I always have this confusion on where to submit my articles because of this problem.
So that should depend on the stage of your career. I'll give you my example. When I was an assistant professor, so publish or perish, the way it works is, at least in the US, when you're first hired to be a professor, you have a short-term contract. Usually it's 3 years and then another 3 years, 6 years. Okay? And in those 6 years, that is the time when you need to publish and prove that your research is research that can appear in the best journals. Right? If you don't succeed, the university at the end of those 6 years can say, sorry, we don't want you anymore. Okay? So at that stage of my career, I was publishing almost always in not Scopus Index journals, but that type of journal. Right? But now at a later stage in my career, where it doesn't matter that much to me, because my contract has been renewed, now it's a longer term contract. Now my personal emphasis is on writing papers in journals whose readers are the readers I want to have a conversation. Right? So in the old days, I used to look at which journal is in which index and what is the impact factor and all of that. Right? Now I look at, when I write an article, whose papers am I citing and in which journals were those papers published? Because if many of those papers were published in the journal Indonesia, which is not Scopus indexed, I will still send my paper to the journal Indonesia. Why? Because I know that a lot of people with whom I want to have the conversation are publishing in that journal. They will read the paper.
Yeah, it's one of the strange things that the top journals are full of papers by young scholars because they're trying to build their careers. I edit the journal of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society, and that journal can attract older people, senior scholars, who are writing for that particular audience of people who are Malaysia specialists. Journal of the Siam Society, same thing. Thai specialists are likely, older ones are likely to go there because that journal reaches a very specific audience of people interested in Thailand. But on the other side of this, there's the question of what your university expects. And universities have different expectations. So your starting point has to be, what does your university want you to do? If they're looking for Scopus journals, then you better go there. If they're saying, well, just international referee, doesn't have to be in Scopus, okay, that gives you a slightly different set of places to go. And in your field, sometimes there'll be a prestigious journal in your field that may or may not be in the indexes, but people will recognize if you go there, you've done something good to get published in that journal. So a lot of this is, you've got to figure out your own situation.
May I say one other thing to follow up on that point? When I was a junior professor, this was at the University of Pittsburgh, I actually used to have conversations. So I had some mentors on my faculty. In my department, there were some senior faculty who were kind of like my mentors. They used to give me advice. I used to ask them, where should I publish? And they used to give me very good advice. So that's another thing. Look within your department, see who there is at Gadjah University, who maybe you want to emulate, or who has accomplished a lot, and ask them, you know, what do you think? Should I send it to this journal or that journal? Why? Now remember, those are people who will probably be involved in making decisions about your promotion also. So it's important to know their opinions as well.
There was another question in the back, yeah?
Yes. I would like to know whether if editors or if reviewers you, whether it is important for the writers to cite or to engage with conversations of the journal that she or he sent his paper to.
So engage with?
Conversations, other articles in the journals.
That came out of the journal for which you're submitting.
Yeah. Okay, we come back to the kind of point he was making. When you write something or you do research, you're going to probably find that a lot of the things you read come from a particular journal, or maybe 2 or 3 journals. And that will probably tell you those are good places for you to send something. But each one of these journals has a set of readers, and there's a discussion going on there. And oftentimes, one article will respond in some way to something said before. It may not even say, I'm answering this, but they'll pick up on a point. So there is a discussion, a conversation, actually probably several conversations going on in any given journal. And it will certainly help if you are participating in that conversation. And one of the interesting things that's going on in the world generally, there is an international English language conversation going on through various journals. There are also a bunch of local conversations. So what's published in Indonesian, what's published in Thai, what's published in Japanese, what's published in Chinese, is often a different set of issues, a different set of topics. So you have to look at the topics that are being discussed, where you want to publish, and fit into that conversation. So, break time?
Break time almost 10:45 break time.
Okay.
For this topic.
Well, let me just make one more quick point. At a workshop I went to several years ago in Jakarta. And there was a man that had done research on what happens in the Sundanese area, sorry, in the Sundanese area, when a child who has only spoken Sundanese enters school, and the school is going to be conducted in Indonesian. So he was examining that situation for a particular village. Now, if you're interested in that village, then that would interest you. How many people are going to be studying that village? Not very many. But you can look at this in a different way. And the way you look at it would be, what happens when a child who has a home language that's different from the school language? So you're not writing about that particular village. That village is your example. But you're writing about a more general topic. And that will interest people who may not care in the slightest about that Sundanese village, but they see the same phenomenon happening somewhere else. So you need to pull some general issue out of the case study that you have. And that will help you get into these broader conversations. Okay, break.
So when we return at 11?
I don't have the schedule here. Is that-
Yeah, I think it's 11.
11
Okay.
o'clock.
Yeah, in terms of 11.
15 minute.
Yes, there's a copy on your site, and then also the schedule, the new schedule, which is pretty much is also available outside, so you can just grab one before you enter.
It's a new school.
Well,
What's
let's say,
because they printed the wrong one, the old one.
Ah.
Well, the proper one.
the
Huh?
one that we printed